Hello, I'm Cadet Travis Propella, and I'll be talking about whether or not NASA should have its budget increased. Short answer, no. It would be more beneficial if it was focused by the private company rather than the public. The topics I would be talking about for this would be NASA during and after the Cold War space race, um, the political climate during those times, today's political climate, new major agencies since the Cold War, both foreign and domestic, the accomplishments of these private companies, the pros and cons of NASA and of the private companies, and why the space innovation should be focused by the private companies, and why NASA should remain as a minor role instead of a major. What NASA did during the space race, it was headed by Wernher von Braun, which created the V2 rocket, the Redstone rocket, and eventually the Saturn V. This was the first American in space and in orbit, first manned mission to the moon, and the budget was over $5 billion. Now over $34 billion in today's money, and each Apollo mission was a costly $25.4 billion. And we eventually had space dominance, which led to the fall of the USSR. NASA after the space race, we had the shuttle program. That was another failure, especially after the Challenger disaster. The budget went down to $22.6 billion, and no more domestically launched rockets. It's all been foreign, mainly through Russia. The systems are now extremely outdated, which are causing the astronauts to bring their own personal devices because they have more computing power than the onboard systems. And they don't really have any motivation to push the limits of space after the fall of the USSR. The political climate during that was during the height of the Cold War. We had major hysteria of the USSR spying on the US, and also the threat of them having dominance in space. US won bragging rights, who doesn't? It was mass technological innovation, and both in space and domestic, as a side note, and huge motivations, especially the goals set by JFK during his Man to the Moon speech. Today's political climate, not as bad as the Cold War. We had the longest run of peace. Other countries are starting to own space programs, and we have no major superpowers to contend to U.S. dominance over space, and no major credible threats to world peace, like during the Cold War. The major foreign space agencies are in China, Europe, India, Japan, and Russia. Major U.S. ones, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Virgin Galactic. The second two are very minor. They haven't done too much compared to SpaceX. SpaceX, however, had the first privately funded liquid-propelled rocket in space in early 2008. They created the first reusable rocket, which is a major innovation. The first autonomous rocket to dock with the ISS, the first privately owned manned mission to the ISS, and finally, they've got rid of the U.S. foreign need of launch, now domestic. In addition to, there are additional resupply runs and obviously manned missions to the ISS. Pros of NASA: it's nationally funded, it's a government agency. They have plenty of manpower, plenty of scientists to keep running the program. It's already an established system. It began in the early 1900s, and it's globally recognized. The cons: it has not had a domestically owned rocket since 2011. Not much incentive to lower the cost because they're not a business. They have no reason to. Outdated equipment, lengthy testing periods, they need lots of government approvals and oversight. They lost the public support to try and push the boundaries, and there's not much incentive to innovate. However, private companies have a lot more incentives. They have their business, so they have to drive down costs so they can spend more and provide more. Less government oversight, so they can, and in terms, launch more and do more tests. As a free market competition will drive the price down, and no need for public support to try to push them. They're their own motivation for money. However, there are a few cons. It's funded by a company or a person, so they're very limited. Limited resources, manpower, and they started from scratch, whereas NASA started many, many years ago. They have no land, no facilities, and a high startup cost because they're, again, starting from scratch. So they had no experience. Luckily, NASA did do a little bit of oversight, but it was mainly brand new. Why is the space innovation should remain focused in the private sector? Like I previously stated, it will drive down costs, has increased motivation, and the rocket likelihood would be much, much higher since costs went down. Lastly, NASA should be a minor role now, so instead of a major like they did in the past, or an advisor to these new privately owned companies, since they had all this experience from space race and the years followed. So they would greatly help the newly established space companies get their footing so they can start off and exploring space as in a world organization. Thank you.